Namaskar. This is First Post and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. It's day 2 after Sheikh Hasina's ouster. How is Bangladesh faring? More than 100 people were killed in the anarchy and violence that followed her resignation yesterday. The minority Hindus are coming under attack. Hasina is still in India in a guest house on the outskirts of the capital. How will New Delhi navigate this? The foreign minister addressed the Indian Parliament today. We'll tell you what he said. Also looking at the key characters in Dhaka who will shape the story going forward, and a special report on how India is now surrounded by chaotic neighbours and unfriendly regimes. Elsewhere, the stock market is still having mood swings. We'll discuss what's causing the sell-off and where will it end. In Africa's Niger, it's America out and Russia in. We'll explain. In the UK, no end to the anti-Muslim and anti-immigrant riots. India issues an advisory for its people, and Elon Musk is now caught in a war of words with Prime Minister Keir Starmer. And there's a new luxury perfume for dogs. But do they even need it? Is it healthy? We'll discuss all of that. The headlines first. Kamala Harris picks Minnesota Governor Tim Walz as a running mate. They will appear together in their first joint rally in Philadelphia later today. 60-year-old Walz described Donald Trump and his running mate J.D. Vance as, and I'm quoting, "These guys are just weird." That comment has now gone viral on social media. U.S. personnel injured in a rocket attack on their base in Iraq. This is the latest in a series of attacks targeting the American base. The U.S. military has more than 2,000 troops in Iraq. The incident comes amid tensions over an expected Iranian counter-attack on Israel. In Nigeria, thousands joined the protest as it enters a sixth day. Police arrest nearly 100 demonstrators carrying Russian flags. Moscow has denied any involvement in the protest. Nigeria is Africa's most populous country. It is facing its worst economic crisis in years. Ellen Ed Morgan sworn in as the first female leader of Wales. It comes 25 years after the post was created. UK's Prime Minister Keir Starmer hails the move. Morgan's predecessor was forced to quit in July after just 4 months in charge. And Neeraj Chopra qualifies for the javelin final at the Paris Olympics. The 26-year-old defending champion needed just one throw. He clocked the season's best of 89.34 meters in the first attempt. The final will take place on Thursday. We continue to track the latest from Bangladesh. Sheikh Hasina is no longer in power. Bangladesh is under military rule. It's a country in flux. The violence has subsided, but tension still lingers in the air. The situation is precarious. The international airport in Dhaka was shut yesterday. Multiple airlines had cancelled flights. By this evening, some carriers resumed flying to Dhaka, but not everyone is free to leave. 2 former ministers were detained at the airport. They served under Sheikh Hasina. They were trying to leave the country. They could not. Meanwhile, in Dhaka, the police and army are still patrolling the streets. Yesterday was the deadliest day of the protest. More than 100 people were killed in a single day. This was despite Sheikh Hasina's decision to step down. The rioting continued even after her resignation. So who were the victims and who were the perpetrators? Well, it's not clear yet. All that we can say for sure is this: there was major loss of life and public property. And what caused so much damage? Local media says it was a combination of police firing, mob violence and arson. There was widespread destruction. Clearly, the police and army failed to control the mob. The protesters stormed the parliament building. They set several police stations on fire. They also targeted multiple offices of the Awami League. That is the party of Sheikh Hasina, the Awami League. A mob torched a hotel yesterday in the Jessore district. It was owned by a leader of the Awami League. 24 people were burnt alive there. 24 people. Even important landmarks have not been spared, like the Bangabandhu Museum in Dhaka. It was set on fire by the mob. The museum was dedicated to Sheikh Mujibur Rahman. He was Sheikh Hasina's father, the man who liberated Bangladesh, the country's founding father. Yesterday, he became a target for the angry mobs. At several locations across the country, statues of Sheikh Mujibur Rahman were vandalized. Many were even taken down. These are some of the most powerful images from Bangladesh. When a revered founding father is treated as a public enemy, it tells you how much has changed. Protesters were celebrating Sheikh Hasina's exit, but this celebration turned into vandalism and led to violence. Even the Prime Minister's official residence was not spared. We showed you these pictures yesterday. Apparently, Sheikh Hasina narrowly avoided these hooligans. Until yesterday morning, she was pushing the army. She wanted the generals to stand up to the protesters, use lethal force and crack down hard. That is what she wanted the army to do, but the army is said to have refused. They chose not to follow the Prime Minister's orders. They decided to not fire bullets on protesters, and that is when Sheikh Hasina ran out of options. She had no choice but to leave. Going by one claim, she had barely 45 minutes to leave Dhaka. She couldn't even pack a bag. That's how dangerous and close it was. Within minutes, the mob stormed her residence. It was really a narrow escape. They looted her belongings. They were spotted outside the Prime Minister's residence with furniture, with house plants, with her clothes, her saris, which apparently belonged to Sheikh Hasina, a Dior bag, even chickens. The focus is now on the army. The generals are in charge of Bangladesh. The president of the country has dissolved the parliament. His name is Mohammad Shahabuddin. Yesterday, he delivered a late-night address. Bangladeshi soldiers were standing behind him, as you can see, and it shows you who is pulling the strings here. Some key announcements were made. All protesters sitting in jails are being released. Even Khaleda Zia has been freed. She's a former prime minister and an opposition leader. Khaleda Zia has been an arch rival of Sheikh Hasina. The president said elections will be held as soon as possible, but the student protesters are not satisfied. They want someone else to be in charge.
We will form an interim government headed by Nobel laureate Muhammad Yunus. Dr. Muhammad Yunus has also accepted this responsibility to protect the people of Bangladesh. We want to present this proposal to the president in the morning itself to form an interim government under the leadership of Dr. Muhammad Yunus.
They were talking about this man, Dr. Muhammad Yunus, a Nobel laureate. Yunus won the Peace Prize in 2006. This was for his micro-loans program in Bangladesh. It pulled millions of people out of poverty. The program earned him a nickname, the banker to the poor. Now, reports say he could serve as a chief advisor to the government. We'll tell you more about him later in the show. Meanwhile, the army met with the student protesters today. The Bangladeshi president was also present in this meeting. The army chief is the man in charge right now. His name is General Waker-Uz-Zaman. Waker-Uz-Zaman, in fact. Yesterday, General Zaman promised an interim government. He is yet to announce who will lead this government, though. The decision should be made soon. Bangladesh needs new leadership as soon as possible, or it risks plunging into more chaos. We'll tell you why. Today, the Bangladeshi police went on strike. The strike was called by the Police Association. They are worried about their security, and it tells you how bad things are. The police are meant to secure people, to maintain law and order. But here, the police are worried about their own security and safety, and they are the ones who say that they need protection. You need effective leadership to steer Bangladesh out of this mess.
I expect the new government will run the country with honesty. Therefore, the people can live and sleep in peace. This is my only request and desire.
I think what has happened yesterday, the vandalism, it was not at all appreciated. The palace belongs to the people like us. We will have to pay for its reconstruction.
Can the army bring normalcy now? Or will they make a bad situation worse? The world is watching, including the Americans, who were unsparing in their criticism of Sheikh Hasina. Washington has issued a statement and they've commented cautiously on Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina's exit.
We welcome the announcement of an interim government and urge any transition be conducted in accordance with Bangladesh's laws. Finally, we are deeply saddened about the reports of human rights abuses, casualties, and injuries over the weekend and past weeks. We share our deepest condolences with those who lost loved ones and those who are suffering.
Bangladesh is facing a significant challenge. It needs peace and stability, and for that, it needs a government that is effective and acceptable to all. Right now, their options do not look great. So things are yet to stabilize in Bangladesh. There is a lot of confusion, a lot of outrage, a lot of violence, and caught in the middle of all of this are minorities. We talked about this yesterday. Around 10% of Bangladesh's population is made up of minorities. That's around 17 million people. Out of these 17 million, more than 13 million are Hindus, and right now they are the soft targets. We've been seeing a lot of videos on social media, temples being attacked, Hindu homes being targeted, and properties being set on fire. Now, just a disclaimer here, not everything that you see on social media may be true. A lot of old and fake videos are also circulating. So we have compiled the verified ones for you. Take a look at this first. Those are heartbreaking scenes. An ISKCON temple in Meherpur was torched. Even the idols inside were completely burnt. In Rangpur, a Hindu politician was reportedly lynched. Plus, a councillor was killed by a mob. It's hard to keep an exact count of these attacks. One minority group is trying to do so. And they say 54 temples and Hindu establishments have been targeted so far. And where are these attacks happening? Well, Bangladesh has 64 districts. Attacks have been reported in at least 27 of them, which means it is pretty widespread. Of course, there is another side too. Many Bangladeshis are standing guard outside Hindu temples. They're also sheltering Hindu neighbors. The question now is, what happens next? Such situations can evolve in two ways. One, the security forces get a grip on the situation. The army has already called for peace, so maybe the violence will subside. That is one possibility. The other one is that the state joins in. Now, we haven't seen indications of this yet, but the track record does not inspire. Just look at the numbers. In 1951, East Pakistan had 22% Hindu population. 22% Hindu population. East Pakistan later became Bangladesh. Today, the country has just 8% Hindus. So where did the rest of them go? Most of them migrated to India. Reports say because of religious persecution, they left Bangladesh. Which brings us to the Jamaat-e-Islami, the radical political group in Bangladesh. They are ruling the streets now, and their ideology is quite clear. It is not secularism, it is Islamism. A Bangladesh only for Muslims, that is what they want, and we've seen evidence of that in the last few days. Protesters have vandalized statues of Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, the man who founded Bangladesh, the man who gave Bangladesh secularism. He's being targeted. So this movement is not just against Sheikh Hasina. It's also against what she stood for, a secular Bangladesh. But will these radical elements succeed? We say a lot will depend on the army. They're trying to cool the tensions. They've also released special helpline numbers for Hindus. If they crack down, things should be fine, things should get better. But if they turn a blind eye to all of this, the violence may continue, and India is concerned about that. Foreign Minister S. Jaishankar spoke about it in Parliament today.
What was particularly worrying was that minorities, their businesses and temples also came under attack at multiple locations. The full extent of this is still not clear. We are also monitoring the situation with regard to the status of minorities. There are reports of initiatives by various groups and organizations to ensure their protection and well-being. We welcome that.
So the situation is precarious. The current violence is mostly driven by different mobs, but the state is not complicit yet. We haven't seen soldiers or security forces joining in. Let's hope it remains that way. But what about the long run? What if Islamists capture power in Dhaka? What if they form the next government? Then things could turn even more serious. Some lawmakers of India's ruling party have raised alarms. They say Hindu refugees could flee to India. How many? One leader said 10 million refugees. So India will have to be on alert. But for Bangladesh, this is a major test. You wanted Sheikh Hasina out. Well, she's out now. But the rest is up to you. The students, the civil society and the army. Will you retain Bangladesh's secular identity, or will you let Islamists run riot? This choice may decide Bangladesh's future.
Concern about recent violence and instability there is shared across the political spectrum.
Times change, and so do relationships. Sheikh Hasina is learning this the hard way. Let me show you the contrast. Back in June, she was hosted by New Delhi, a full-fledged state visit. You name it, she got it. A red carpet welcome, a ceremonial reception, and a banquet hosted by the president. And why not? Hasina was the first bilateral guest of Prime Minister Modi's third term. But look at the scenes now. Sheikh Hasina is a leader on the run. She's holed up at the Hindon Air Base on the outskirts of Delhi. No cameras, no red carpets, no ceremonial welcomes. It's a contrast that sums up geopolitics. You may rule for years or decades, but you will never be more important than your country. I guess that's the message from India too. This whole thing is complicated for New Delhi. Yes, Sheikh Hasina is a friend, but she's also public enemy number one in Bangladesh today. How do you protect her without antagonizing Bangladeshis? That is the predicament. Maybe that's why India was slow to react. Hasina fled Dhaka at around 3 p.m. India time on Monday, but India did not issue a statement until today evening, almost 24 hours later. First, the foreign minister convened an all-party meeting. He briefed the opposition on the situation. Then he gave a statement in Parliament. Now, all eyes were on Jaishankar. How would he describe the events in Bangladesh? Would he express sympathy for Sheikh Hasina? Listen to what he said.
Since the election in January 2024, there has been considerable tension, deep divides, and growing polarization in Bangladesh politics. This underlying foundation aggravated a student agitation that started in June this year. Throughout this period, we repeatedly counseled restraint and urged that the situation be diffused through dialogue. Similar urgings were made to various political parties, political forces with whom we were in touch. Speaker, sir, despite the Supreme Court judgment on 21 July, there was no let-up in the public agitation. Various decisions and actions taken thereafter only exacerbated the situation.
Let's break down what the minister said. First of all, what triggered this unrest? Not just the quota controversy. Jaishankar says it all began with the elections in January this year. He says it created tensions and divides. Secondly, how did India react to these developments? Well, in public, New Delhi did not say much. They called it an internal matter of Bangladesh. But privately, India was concerned. Jaishankar says that he counselled restraint and dialogue. Not just with Sheikh Hasina, he hinted that India was talking to other political groups as well. Which brings us to the final question. How did India handle those hours leading up to Hasina's escape? Listen to the minister again.
On 5th August, demonstrators converged in Dhaka despite the curfew. Our understanding is that after a meeting with leaders of the security establishment, Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina apparently decided to resign. At very short notice, she requested approval to come for the moment to India. We simultaneously received a request for flight clearance from the Bangladesh authorities. She arrived yesterday evening in Delhi.
It sounds like India was caught by surprise. Perhaps New Delhi expected Hasina to survive this. Or maybe they underestimated the protests. Either way, Hasina fled. She is still at a safe house at the Hindon Air Base. But for how much longer? Hasina is seeking political asylum in the UK. India will be hoping that she gets it soon. If not, her stay here will have to be extended. What about other options? Well, Sheikh Hasina does have a US visa, but reports say that Washington has now cancelled it. I know it sounds unfair, but this is the harsh reality of geopolitics. Ousted leaders are political kryptonite. No one wants to touch them. Of course, the UK is an exception. They have a history of hosting toppled presidents and exiled spies. And if the UK also rejects her, what happens then? Then Dubai is reportedly another option. But let's come back to India for the moment. How is New Delhi bracing for the churn in Dhaka? Well, Jaishankar highlighted a couple of issues. One, treatment of minorities. He flagged the attacks on Hindu houses and temples. That is one concern. Two, the Indian community in Bangladesh. Around 19,000 citizens of India live in Bangladesh. Close to 9,000 of them are students. So their safety is top priority. And finally, issue number three, the border. Minister Jaishankar says the border forces have been asked to be vigilant. So clearly he fears a spillover. But these are all short-term concerns. In the long run, India will have to recalibrate. We had an ally for 15 years in Dhaka, and now we don't. And that's a reality that India will have to accept. New Delhi is in contact with authorities in Dhaka, but do not expect meaningful conversations just yet, not until Sheikh Hasina leaves Indian soil. As crude as it sounds, this is the truth. The events in Bangladesh have unfolded almost like a gripping novel. Until 2 days ago, Sheikh Hasina dominated the story. She was the main character, but now she's gone. So who will take over? Who will write Bangladesh's story now? Let's look at the new faces. First on our list is Waker-Uz-Zaman, Bangladesh's army chief. We've been telling you about him. He addressed the nation after Hasina's departure. But who is he? Zaman was born in Dhaka in 1966. He studied in both Bangladesh and London. He married the daughter of Bangladesh's former army chief, and that made him family to Sheikh Hasina. He is her cousin-in-law. Zaman has had a 3-decade-long military career. He's helped modernize the army. He oversaw peacekeeping operations. He also received multiple medals. And amid all of this, he worked very closely with Sheikh Hasina. Until 6 months ago, he was the Chief of General Staff. But on the 23rd of June, Sheikh Hasina promoted him. She made him the army chief. Hasina thought it was a guarantee of loyalty, and that perhaps was her biggest mistake. On Monday, she wanted the army chief and the army to crack down on protesters, but Zaman refused. Insider details suggest that she reminded him of his appointment. She even asked him to return the favor. But Zaman did not budge. His officers wouldn't fire at the protesters, and that changed everything. It ended Sheikh Hasina's reign. But the army does not necessarily have a good reputation in Bangladesh. They were behind assassinations. They've staged coups. So what will it be this time? The army says it will meet student leaders. It will hold talks with political parties. It will help form the interim government. And who will be in this government? Now, one name has been doing the rounds. It stands out, and that is Khaleda Zia. That's the second major character in this story. Khaleda Zia is Bangladesh's first female prime minister. She was born in India. Her husband was a military officer. He served as Bangladesh's president. In 1981, he was assassinated. 3 years later, Zia became the head of her husband's party, the Bangladesh Nationalist Party, or BNP. In 1991, she won the election. She failed to get a majority, though, so she joined hands with Jamaat-e-Islami. From 1991 to 2006, only 2 leaders ruled Bangladesh, Sheikh Hasina and Khaleda Zia. They took power one after the other, and they fought what was called the Battle of the Begums. But in 2007, Khaleda Zia was arrested for corruption. In 2018, she got a 10-year prison term, and she spent most of this time in hospital because of her poor health. When Hasina fled Dhaka, Zia was under house arrest. Hours later, she was released. But she's unlikely to join politics, again because of her poor health. So there is the army on one side and the main opposition party, the BNP, on the other. Does Bangladesh want them? Not really. Which brings us to the third key character in this story, Nahid Islam. You may have never heard of him because until 2 months ago, he was a nobody in Bangladesh. He's a university student, a student at Dhaka University. He studies sociology. He's an activist. In the month of June, Bangladesh brought back the job quota system. It led to a student protest. They called it the Students Against Discrimination Movement. And Nahid Islam is one of their national coordinators. Since then, he's been vocal against Sheikh Hasina, but it was not easy for him. In July, he was kidnapped twice. He was tortured and even left unconscious under a bridge. Despite everything, he remained at the thick of things. He led protests against Sheikh Hasina until the very last day, and now she's gone. But Islam says he's not done yet. The students want an interim government, but they do not want the army or the BNP leading it. They want this man, Muhammad Yunus, Bangladesh's Nobel laureate, the fourth character in our story. Yunus was born in Chittagong. He got his PhD in the US. After 1971, he returned to Bangladesh. As the country struggled with poverty, Yunus came up with a plan, microcredit or small loans. For the people who do not qualify for bank loans, they get small loans. The first experiment worked, so Yunus launched the Grameen Bank. It gave loans worth $34 billion to 10 million people. The recovery rate was 97%. So it was a success. Yunus was awarded the Nobel Prize in 2006. He was called the banker to the poor. But soon the banker wanted to be a politician. Yunus wanted to form a political party. Sheikh Hasina did not like it. There was friction. In 2009, the government of Bangladesh started investigating Muhammad Yunus. He was accused of extorting rural women. Hasina said, and I'm quoting, he was sucking blood from the poor. In 2011, he was removed as head of the Grameen Bank and accused of corruption and embezzlement. Muhammad Yunus has more than 100 cases against him. In January this year, he was sentenced to prison. He hasn't been jailed yet. When Hasina fled Dhaka, Mohammed Yunus was in Paris. His spokesperson says he's agreed to the request of the students. He will be chief advisor to the interim government. But the question is, who will call the shots? Will the BNP try to exploit the political vacuum now? Will the army rule Bangladesh, or will students have a say in government formation? At this point, all stakeholders remain adamant. All of them want their demands met. But the thing is, not everyone can rule the country. So we'll have to wait and see who makes the cut.
আমাদেরকে দমিয়ে রেখে থাকতে কারণ নাই। আমরা যদি একবার রুখে দাঁড়াই, আমরা ইনশাআল্লাহ বাংলাদেশের স্বপ্ন করেই ছাড়বো। আর সেনা বাইরের যেসব ভাইয়েরা আমাদেরকে বাধা দিতে চেষ্টা করবেন, আপনাকে বলতে চাই, আপনারা দয়া করে সহযোগিতার সহযোগী হবেন না। আপনারা হয় জনতার কাতারে নেমে আসুন, নয়তো নিরপেক্ষ থাকবেন।
They will feel that they have won today because a lot of people have lost their lives in this fight, which really began peacefully only over quotas and government jobs, but escalated because of mishandling by the government, by the absolute arrogance of the political leadership.
So Bangladesh wants a new government. Who will it include? We don't know yet, but here is something we do know. The Awami League will not be part of this new government. The Awami League is Sheikh Hasina's party. Now Hasina may be gone, but the members of her party, the members of Awami League, are still in Bangladesh, and they are being targeted by mobs. So what's next for them? Who is in charge now? And will the party be able to recover from this setback? Our next report explores.
Until yesterday, the anger was directed towards Sheikh Hasina. The protesters blamed her. They called her a dictator. They wanted her to resign. But things changed after she fled the country. Hasina was gone, but the protesters were still angry. So they shifted focus to her party, the Awami League. On Monday, one such mob entered the Zabir International Hotel. It set fire to the ground floor. 24 people died, including an Indonesian national. This hotel belonged to Shahin Chakladar. He was the District Awami League General Secretary. And it wasn't the only such incident. Mobs across the country targeted anything linked to the Awami League. Residences, business establishments, and even the party's central office in Dhaka. In other parts of the capital, demonstrators broke into the house of Ouster-Zaman Khan. He was Bangladesh's home minister. Protesters also burnt down the house of Mashraf bin Murtaza. He's Bangladesh's former cricket captain. He was also an Awami League MP. Protesters also set fire to the district Awami League office. They even vandalized its president Subhash Chandra Bose's house. In the eastern city of Sylhet, officers of the Deputy Police Commissioner and the Superintendent of Police were burnt down. Local councillors too were targeted. So while Hasina may have escaped violence, her party workers faced the wrath of the mobs. Some tried to escape, like Zunaid Ahmed Palak. He was Bangladesh's former IT minister and he attempted to flee the country but was detained at the airport. So what happens to the Awami League now? Hasina is out, but who will replace her? Hasina's son was asked about it.
Nobody has ever imagined that Bangladesh would have such developments. Fair enough, what will happen to you after post-Sheikh Hasina regime? It is none of my concern, nor my family's anymore. You will realize.
The Awami League was founded in 1949 after breaking away from Pakistan's Muslim League. That makes it Bangladesh's oldest party. It soon gained massive support in then East Pakistan. Under the leadership of Sheikh Hasina's father, Awami League began its struggle for independence. Sheikh Mujibur Rahman led mass protests, even civil disobedience movements. After Bangladesh was formed, the Awami League won the first elections in 1973. But in 1975, Sheikh Mujibur Rahman was assassinated. Party leaders were arrested, some of them were killed. In 1981, Sheikh Hasina returned to Bangladesh. She became the Awami League's president. Since then, the party has only grown. It was lauded for its secular outlook. The Awami League has long been the principal player of Bangladeshi politics. 5 of its leaders have become the president of Bangladesh. 4 have become the prime minister of the country. So Awami League has seen it all: the birth of Bangladesh, the growth of Bangladesh, and its democratic backsliding. The Awami League may be persona non grata today, but it's impossible to wipe it out from Bangladesh's politics and history.
You can choose your friends, but you cannot choose your neighbors. Atal Bihari Vajpayee said this many years ago, and it still rings true. Good neighbors are like cheat codes in a game. They make your life a lot easier. No worries at the border, plenty of trade, and a friend that you can rely on. Unfortunately, India doesn't have that cheat code. Let me pull up the map for you. This is India's neighborhood. First, you have Afghanistan, ruled by a radical Islamist Taliban. They have a history of supporting anti-India groups. Then you have Pakistan, basically Afghanistan with nuclear weapons. It's a synonym for political instability. Not a single Pakistan Prime Minister has completed their term in office. Before that, the army steps in. Down south, you have Sri Lanka and the Maldives. Sri Lanka declared bankruptcy in 2022. The pictures were quite similar to Bangladesh. Protesters stormed the presidential palace, so the ruler had to flee. The Maldives used to be an Indian ally, but the new president is playing hardball. His campaign slogan was India Out. Then you have Nepal. Their Prime Minister is KP Sharma Oli. But I suggest you check again by the end of this show because it keeps changing. Nepal has had 14 governments in 16 years. It is so bad that some people want to restore the monarchy. Further up north is China, an expansionist, undemocratic bully, a country that claims Indian territory as its own. Let's move to Bhutan now. Domestic politics is quite stable there. But Bhutan is looking to sign a border deal with China, a deal that India is worried about. Then there's Myanmar. The army holds power there. Most politicians are behind bars and a civil war is on. Which brings us to Bangladesh. It really was India's last reliable ally, someone New Delhi could count on. But with Sheikh Hasina gone, you can cross Dhaka off. Now take a final look at this map. What do you see? A very troubled neighborhood. You have Islamist radicals, you have military juntas, you have bankrupt economies, you have countries sinking because of climate change, and in the middle you have India, sort of like the last man standing. But what does this troubled neighborhood mean for India? How will it affect India's future? Broadly in three ways. One, you must be vigilant at all times. Just look at the Bangladesh border. All the violence is unfolding inside Bangladesh, yet Indian border forces are on alert. Same with Pakistan and China. India cannot count on these countries to keep the peace, which means more troop deployment, more defense spending and more border infrastructure. And secondly, it allows India's rivals to make inroads. We're mostly talking about China here. Just look at the pattern. Who capitalized on the Maldives' India out policy? China did. Who capitalized on Sri Lanka's bankruptcy? Again, China. And who is talking to Bhutan about settling the border? Again, China. You see, India won't work with undemocratic regimes like Afghanistan or Myanmar, but Beijing will. As a result, they have made gains in India's backyard. Which brings us to the final point. It shackles India's global agenda, this troubled neighborhood. We've heard the Prime Minister talk about it. He wants to turn India into a Vishwa Bandhu, meaning a friend to the world. But as they say, charity begins at home. You can't focus on the world when your region is up in flames. You need regional stability to think global. Now, I know what you're thinking. Can India really make a difference here? After all, these are all domestic problems in sovereign nations. Still, there is scope. You see, India looms large over this region. Let's keep China aside for the moment. Every other Indian neighbor has historic ties with India. Some of them were carved out of India, plus New Delhi is best placed to make a difference here. India's population is 1.4 billion. The neighbors put together are 500 million. Same with the economy. India's GDP is $3 trillion. The rest is around 1 trillion. So India has two options here. Either ignore the chaos around and push forward, basically hope that the region does not pull India down, or use its influence to steer things in the right direction. I know it's pointless with countries like Pakistan, but elsewhere there is hope. Now let's talk about the stock markets. After a bloody Monday, it was a patchy day of trading for major markets. Japan witnessed a big rebound, jumping by 10% after yesterday's crash. Markets in South Korea and Taiwan saw some recovery too. And what about the Indian markets? Well, they closed the day's trade in the red, but the losses were not too significant. Both the Sensex and the Nifty dropped by less than 1%. What about the United States? Remember, yesterday's crash was largely triggered by weak American economic data. And how are the American indices faring now? US stocks saw some tepid recovery in early trade. The investors are still nervous. As one expert described the situation, there are falling knives everywhere. Many stocks are trading at a discount, but traders are not sure if they should start buying again or wait for a bit. In the last 3 weeks alone, global markets have lost some $6.4 trillion, and yet traders do not know if this is the end. They don't know if the market has bottomed out or not. The US Fed is trying to reassure them. The Fed is the Federal Reserve, it's the Central Bank of America. One of the Fed officials said that they will fix any deterioration in the US economy. Another official says the US Fed will do whatever it takes.
The unemployment rate is still low by historical standards. The job growth is about at the rate that new entrants are entering the labor force. So I see an economy that has momentum, and we want to make sure we keep that, because the perfect economy is the one where you have price stability and you have sustainable growth.
The American Central Bank has a key role to play here. It controls the interest rates, the rate at which banks give you loans. The Fed controls it, and since March 2022, the Fed has steadily raised these interest rates. Today, they stand at between 5.25 and 5.5%, which is a 23-year high. Now, this hike was necessary. You see, America was facing its biggest inflation spike in 40 years, 4 decades. It had crossed 9%. So the Fed hiked interest rates to contain inflation. Here's how it works. When you hike interest rates, you make loans more expensive. So people don't take too many loans because they're expensive. And they limit big purchases. So people spend less, and this squeezes out the excess cash from the economy. As the demand falls, it also brings down prices, which in turn helps control the inflation. So the Fed has kept interest rates high to control inflation, but now they're promising a rate cut in September.
We are strongly committed to returning inflation to our 2% goal in support of a strong economy that benefits everyone. If we were to see, for example, inflation moving down quickly or more or less in line with expectations, growth remains, let's say, reasonably strong, and the labor market remains, consistent with its current condition, then I would think that a rate cut could be on the table at the September meeting.
So that is the Fed's plan. But some banks on the Wall Street are not happy with it, like Bank of America and UBS. They want the Federal Reserve to make an intervention now. They want a rate cut sooner. For the moment, the Fed does not look inclined to do that. They say no rate cut before September, but if the current sentiment around the US economy persists, the Federal Reserve may have no choice but to intervene. As it is, Americans are already feeling gloomy about the economy. Here's what a survey has found. 3 out of 5 Americans believe that there is a recession in the country and recovery might take another year or so. They're not feeling optimistic about the future. Moody's says most consumers in America feel that the job situation could deteriorate. So they're thinking twice before making purchases. They want to hold on to their savings. So Americans are feeling a recession, even though the numbers tell a different story. And despite all this data, the overall sentiment about the American economy is turning negative. Stock markets, as you know, run on sentiments. That should explain the swings. Our next story is from Africa, from Niger in the west. A military coup took place in Niger last year, and a lot has changed in the country since then. The biggest change is Niger's choice of security partners. The country is a hotbed for terrorist insurgencies. Niger's military has been fighting terrorists since 2015, and until last year, the West was helping them. France, Germany, and the US, all of these countries had their forces in Niger. But that changed with the coup. The military took over last July, and the first thing they did was expel the French. Once that was done, it was America's turn. And yesterday, that too was concluded. The US forces have packed up and gone home. They have relinquished both their military bases in Niger. There's now a security vacuum in the West African nation, which Russia is more than willing to fill. Here's our report.
This withdrawal started on May 19, 2024. And is coming to an end today with a ceremony to hand over installations in the presence of officials from both countries, marked by the departure of the last C-17 Globemaster III of the U.S. Air Force.
Niger's army chief made that announcement yesterday from Air Base 201, near the central Nigerian city of Agadez. This airbase was built by the Americans. They built it between 2016 and 2019 at a cost of over $100 million. All that American hard work and taxpayer money has now gone down the drain. Airbase 201 was built to combat terror in the Sahel. Niger is among several countries in the region that are facing a terrorist insurgency. Its neighbors, Burkina Faso and Mali, are also fighting the terrorists. Groups like the JNIM, which is affiliated with Al-Qaeda, and various offshoots of the Islamic State. Terrorists from these groups have been wreaking havoc in the Sahel for years, so the Americans built Airbase 201 to help in counter-insurgency operations.
Over the past decade, U.S. troops have trained Niger's forces and supported partner-led counterterrorism missions against Islamic State and Al-Qaeda in the region.
Airbase 201 was a drone base built to house American MQ-9 Reaper drones. These drones were used for surveillance to support the Nigerian troops on the ground. But in March, Niger decided it could do without the American support. It ended a military agreement between the two nations, calling it profoundly unfair. That is what set the American exodus in motion. And this concluded yesterday. But even though the Americans were kicked out, Niger hasn't completely shut the door.
This withdrawal does not mean the end of military cooperation between the two countries. In fact, both parties are now committed to maintaining contact and working together to define the foundations of a new military cooperation.
Niger says that military cooperation is possible in the future, but on different, better terms. We'll see if the US comes back with a better offer. But in the meantime, there's another power eager to take America's place: Russia. Moscow has been working with Niger's junta for months. In May, it sent Russian forces to allegedly train the Nigerian military. These trainers started operating out of a different airbase, Airbase 101, located near Niger's capital, Niamey. The Russian trainers are likely to make good use of Airbase 201 as well. This entire saga demonstrates the changes in West Africa. The region is moving away from the West and embracing other partners, like Russia. The US and its Western allies need to look at why. Why are they so unpopular? And why are they being replaced? Unless they can figure out the answer to that, losing a $100 million airbase may just be the beginning of their West African woes.
Now let's turn our attention to the UK, where the riots show no sign of dying down. They began in the seaside town of Southport last week, after the brutal stabbing there left 3 young children dead. The children were murdered by a British national, a 17-year-old of Rwandan heritage who was born in Wales. But this attack sparked nationwide anti-Muslim riots. The police say that the attacker had no known links to Islam, but the British rioters do not believe that. They have chosen to believe the rumours that they heard online about the attacker being a Muslim migrant. And that is why the riots began. The rioters have been targeting mosques and hotels being used to house asylum seekers. Both these groups are terrified. They're afraid of being attacked.
The Muslim communities are terrorized. If I'm going to use the word, they are terrorized. They fear for their safety. They fear that they cannot go out. They fear that anything could happen. Like we saw that taxi drivers have been attacked. So people cannot really go and do their day-to-day job realistically, because Uber drivers have been attacked, taxi drivers attacked, women are threatened, mosques vandalized. And this is becoming the kind of, in the last few days, the activity that is happening on a daily basis across different regions.
I feel very stressed and it's very distressing moment in our life. We've never seen this kind of far-right group active against anti-immigrant. So we are living fear and anxiety. This could be, anything could happen to us, and we are living fear.
The British police force has been trying to stop the rioters, but they don't seem to have the numbers, and now they're also dealing with counter-protesters. These were the scenes from Plymouth yesterday. It's a city in southwest England. The two groups faced off against each other. There were the anti-Muslim, anti-immigrant rioters on one side and the counter-protesters on the other. You can hear them chanting slogans of unity.
On immigration.
It's a valiant effort, but it hasn't stopped the violence in Britain. While this was going on in Plymouth, here's what was happening in Belfast, in Northern Ireland. Rioters set buildings and various objects on fire using petrol bombs. They were also throwing these bombs and other objects at the police. It's a massive failure of law and order. Britain's Prime Minister Keir Starmer is scrambling to come up with a solution.
First is we will have a standing army of specialist officers, public duty officers, so that we'll have enough officers to deal with this where we need them. We'll ramp up criminal justice. There have already been hundreds of arrests. Some have appeared in court this morning. I've asked for early consideration of the earliest naming and identification of those involved in the process, who will feel the full force of the law. And thirdly, I've been absolutely clear that the criminal law applies online as well as offline, and I'm assured that that's the approach that is being taken.
Starmer plans to set up a standing army of specialist officers. British courts will sit for all 24 hours of the day. They will work around the clock to sentence the rioters. About 400 people have been arrested so far. They could face up to 10 years in prison. Jail capacity in the UK has been increased to make room for all the rioters and for the people instigating the riots online. One man has already been charged for hateful Facebook posts. And that is what Starmer meant when he said that criminal law applies both online and offline. The British Prime Minister is trying to put an end to the violence. He's clearly struggling, though. And amid all of this, he's found himself in a war of words with Elon Musk, the billionaire owner of social media platform X, formerly known as Twitter. It started with this. Musk replied to a post about the riots saying, "Civil war is inevitable." That's what he said. Obviously, Keir Starmer did not take kindly to this. The British government called Musk, and I'm quoting, "deeply irresponsible and deplorable." But that has not stopped Musk. He has called the British police response one-sided. He has criticised the British Prime Minister's action plan and he opposes Starmer's crackdown on hate speech online. Basically, Elon Musk has become a thorn in Keir Starmer's side. Of course, none of this helps the situation, which remains tense. That is why several countries have issued advisories to their citizens. Australia is one of them. It says there's a threat of terrorism in the UK. Malaysia is another. It has warned its citizens to stay away from protests and remain vigilant. Nigeria too has issued a warning. It has asked people from the Nigerian community to avoid large gatherings. And rounding off the list of concerned former colonies is India. Indians visiting the UK have been asked to exercise due caution. These warnings and advisories are the need of the hour because the British rioters are clearly targeting people on the basis of race and religion. What's to stop them from attacking tourists next? Britain's racist genie is truly out of the bottle and it is spreading fires and hatred in all corners of the country. Even if Keir Starmer manages to quell the violence, how will he tackle the ingrained racism in British society?
Security forces into something which was so angry and demanded that Prime Minister step down. So they will be happy today.